13 years since Natalee Holloway went on vacation to Aruba and disappeared, never to be seen again. Today, an Oz True Crime exclusive.
Natalee Holloway's family has gone through unprecedented psychological agony for the past 20 years since her death. Even though the prime suspect remained silent for so many years and never once admitted to the accusations leveled against him, at least his later confession provided some relief, which will never bring back their beloved daughter and sweet friend. Perhaps nothing is worse than knowing how a child was brutally killed. Now that justice has been served, come with us as we examine every aspect of Natalee's case. But how did a bright student's dream trip unravel into a decades-long nightmare that gripped a nation and shattered a family? And what finally forced the man at the center of it all to break his silence after 20 years? Justice, finally. The survivors of the early 2000s must recall Natalee Holloway's heavenly face. Her vibrant smile dominated every television screen, and her name dominated headlines nationwide. At just 18 years old, having just finished secondary school in Alabama, she embarked on what was meant to be a graduation celebration trip to Aruba in May of 2005. But this sun-kissed vacation rapidly descended into a nightmare, one that would continue to haunt her family and capture the country's fascination for the next 20 years. For years, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance were shrouded in mystery. Rumors circulated, names of suspects were mentioned, investigations went nowhere, and many media programs carried the story. Every watcher had his or her own idea of what had taken place. The case was stuck in time, a sore puzzle that could not be deciphered. At the middle of this enduring enigma was one individual, Joran van der Sloot. As the person last seen with Natalee, he immediately became the target of suspicion. But without physical evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt, authorities were not able to secure a conviction. Flash forward to 2023, and the dynamics drastically shifted. In a somber Birmingham, Alabama courtroom, the truth that had for so long been concealed finally emerged, and was even more disturbing than initially suspected. As part of a plea agreement for unrelated extortion charges, Joran finally confessed. His confession exceeded mere knowledge of the situation. He claimed responsibility for her death. In his version, he attempted to force unwanted advances on Natalee on the beach. When she resisted, he brutally assaulted her with a cinder block, then disposed of her body in the ocean. The ugly reality was appallingly straightforward. For Natalee's mother, Beth Holloway, it was a moment of collision between the surreal and the devastating. Having spent 18 years trying to find answers, pursuing countless leads that led to nothing, and clinging to hope for a breakthrough, she was at last able to get closure, not in the form of justice in Aruba or newly discovered evidence, but in the words of the man who had tormented her for nearly 2 decades. "It's done," she said. "Joran van der Sloot is no longer a suspect. He's the killer." While a tone of determination resonated in her voice, the underlying grief still came through loud and clear. Closure can be a paradox, sometimes creating peace, sometimes reopening old wounds. What's so strange about this case is why van der Sloot was in an Alabama courtroom in the first place. Rather than being tried for Natalee's death, the reason for his presence was due to a 2010 extortion scheme against Beth Holloway. He would disclose the whereabouts of Natalee's remains for $250,000. After receiving partial payment, he knowingly provided inaccurate information. This deception became the primary foundation of his extradition from Peru, where he was already sentenced to a 28-year sentence for the 2010 killing of another woman, Stephanie Flores. It became horrifically evident that his criminality didn't stop with Natalee. But if he was capable of extorting a grieving mother, and killing again in cold blood. What exactly happened that night in Aruba? And why did it take 2 decades for him to finally reveal the truth? The confession. At the focal point of the Holloway mystery was Vander Sloot, whose pivotal role was evident from the start. His final few hours with Natalee on May 30th, 2005 were vital ones, the last documented encounter with the 18-year-old Alabama teen before she vanished during her Aruban vacation. The investigation found an immediate pattern of deception, as Vander Sloot's tales underwent radical revisions. He initially maintained that he and 2 of his friends had dropped Natalee off at her hotel. He subsequently altered his story and claimed to have left her on the beach. This inconsistency infuriated the public and aroused suspicion. But despite lengthy interrogation and investigation, decisive evidence could not be established. Vander Sloot remained a public figure in the ensuing years, frequently making outlandish and unsubstantiated claims about what had occurred that night. The break came in 2008, when Dutch investigative journalist Peter R. de Vries covertly recorded Vander Sloot appearing to confess to having been present when Natalee died and when her body was disposed of. When questioned, however, he dismissed the recording as a lie, a deliberate falsehood intended to win credibility with the alleged harmful substance dealer. This established a recurring pattern. Vander Sloot would provide confessions only to retract them, saying they had been lies intended to deceive, manipulate, or cash in on publicity. His motives became increasingly questionable. In 2010, Vander Sloot orchestrated an extortion scheme against Natalee's mother, Beth Holloway, wherein he offered to reveal her daughter's remains in exchange for money. He took partial payment and then led her lawyer on a wild goose chase to a house. This led to federal extortion and wire fraud charges in the United States, further cementing Vander Sloot as not just a manipulative individual, but one who was also happy to profit from a mother's pain. The case reached its watershed moment in 2023, nearly 2 decades after Holloway's disappearance, when Vander Sloot, facing potential extradition and U.S. charges, provided a confession that law enforcement deemed credible and comprehensive. Within his statement, it was the first instance in which Vander Sloot gave a statement with sufficient corroborative details to be officially confirmed. This last admission served a dual purpose, confirming long-held suspicions while simultaneously revealing Vander Sloot's manipulative tendencies in stark clarity. His actions exhibited a pattern of nearly 2 decades of manipulation of the truth, putting a grieving family through an elaborate scheme of lies. The character of the confession itself, unemotional, remorseless, and calculated, provided a glimpse into a seriously disturbed person whose desire for control and attention always came ahead of any desire to tell the truth. More than a simple admission of guilt, it was the end result of a lengthy campaign of psychological warfare. The confession by Vander Sloot in the Holloway case is more a bitter acknowledgement than a victory for justice. Shutting one door, it offers minimal solace, its primary impact being to highlight the lengthy duration of truth suppression and the pain wrought in the interim years. The tale transcends straightforward criminality. It's a saga of truth manipulation, exploitation of doubt, and the ultimate unmasking of a killer's conscience previously obscured behind a veil of deception. There were other suspects besides Vander Sloot. 2 former security guards, Nick John and Abraham Jones, were arrested by Aruban authorities on June 5th and detained on suspicion of kidnapping and killing Natalee Holloway. These 2 men had both worked at the Allegro Hotel, which was undergoing renovation at the time. Even though the reason for the arrest was never disclosed by authorities publicly, the media reported that statements made by Vander Sloot and the Calpo brothers contributed to the decision-making. It was also suggested by reports that John and Jones frequented hotel properties to meet women, and one of them had a prior legal problem. Both were detained for over a week and released on June 13th without charge. Just days before, on June 9th, police arrested Joran van der Sloot and the Deepak and Satish Kalpoe brothers as suspects in kidnapping and death. Police are authorized under Aruban law to detain people on strong suspicion, but they must continuously provide additional evidence to justify continued detention at judicial reviews. Deputy Police Chief Gerald Dompig later revealed that these three suspects were the prime focus of the investigation from day one. The police started surveillance operations, wiretapping, and monitoring emails 3 days after Holloway was reported missing. Dompig stated, nevertheless, that the pressure exerted by Holloway's family compelled the authorities to act more quickly than they would have liked and make arrests before they had gathered all the evidence. On June 11th, David Cruz, the Aruban Minister of Justice's spokesman, erroneously reported Natalee's death and said that authorities knew where her body was. He subsequently retracted the statement, attributing it to misinformation. Later that night, Dompig told the Associated Press that one of the suspects had admitted something bad had happened to Natalee after he took her to the beach and that police were being led to the site. Prosecution officials did not confirm or refute this allegation the following day, saying only that the investigation was at a sensitive phase. A sixth suspect, disc jockey Steve Gregory Crows, was arrested by police on June 17th after being implicated by one of the original suspects. Joran's father, Paulus van der Sloot, was briefly arrested and detained on June 22nd. Both Paulus and Kroos were released on June 26th. It was during this period that the statements of the suspects changed multiple times. Ultimately, all three adhered to the reality that Joran and Natalee were dropped off at the beach near the Marriott Hotel, and the Kalpoe brothers departed. Initially, Joran claimed he left Natalee on the beach alive. Then Joran called Deepak and sent a text message 40 minutes later that he was walking home, according to Satish Kalpoe's attorney. Dompig condemned this third version, involving Joran changing his story just to shift blame onto the Kalpoe brothers after they began pointing fingers at him. He pointed out that inconsistencies in their accounts made suspects fight among themselves during court proceedings. Dompig presumed the second version of the story, that Natalee and Joran were indeed dropped at the beach by the Marriott Hotel. Following judicial review, the Kalpoe brothers were released on July 4th, but van der Sloot was detained for an additional 60 days. On July 4th, 2005, F-16 aircraft from the Royal Netherlands Air Force were used along with infrared sensors to help locate Natalee Holloway, but they did not find anything. After assessing the land in March 2006 and using satellite imagery and more recent imagery, the authorities were supposed to see if there were changes in the landscape, which might indicate a body was buried. The tip from a local groundskeeper, who reported seeing Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers, was on or around the Aruba Racket Club early on May 30th. Police partially drained a pond in the vicinity, but nothing was found. A tip was received when a jogger told police he saw individuals burying a blonde woman in the same landfill that had previously been searched. Police scoured the landfill 3 additional times using cadaver dogs, but found nothing. The FBI collaborated with Aruban police in analyzing duct tape with blonde hair, though forensic analysis concluded the hair did not belong to Holloway. The Kalpoe brothers were rearrested on August 26th, along with Freddie Arambatsis, who faced unrelated charges involving a minor. Dompig later admitted that these arrests were tactical measures to pressure the suspects into confessing, to no avail. All the suspects were ordered released by a judge in September 2005, stipulating that they be available for questioning. All of the restrictions were lifted on September 14th. Vandersloot did a number of media interviews in the subsequent months. In an interview with Fox News in March 2006, he stated that Holloway wanted to have, but he declined since he had no protection. He told her she decided to remain on the beach and that his friend Satish came to pick him up around 3 a.m. Satish's lawyer, however, refuted this account and said that Satish went to sleep and did not retrieve Joran that night. Vandersloot conceded early dishonesty, but attributed it to believing Holloway would resurface soon. In early 2006, the FBI re-arrested and re-interviewed Holloway's classmates, and Aruban police searched sand dunes and the area around the Marriott Hotel Beach again, both to no avail. Before recusing himself from the case, Chief Gerald Dompig gave an interview in which he indicated that he thought it was possible Holloway may have died from alcohol or substance poisoning and that her body was then hidden. He also put the cost of the investigation at around $3 million for Aruba. Holloway's family denied any claims of substance use. On April 11, 2006, Natalee's father, Dave Holloway, authored a book detailing the hunt for his daughter and blaming Aruban authorities for corruption and incompetence. What are we left with today? For most, the case is closed, but it is not the victorious kind. Instead, it is an open sore torn open once more. Although we finally received our answers, they were from the least wanted source, in the worst possible manner. The brutal death of Natalee. Natalee Holloway was killed violently, a 2023 confession by Joran Vandersloot revealed. There had been years of falsehoods and half-truths prior to his admission to killing her on the night she disappeared in 2005 in Aruba. He, in his confession, admitted to attempting to sexually assault her. When she fought back and resisted, he lost control. He struck her with a cinder block to the head at that point, killing her immediately, from his own description. What makes this event more horrible is Vandersloot's planned acts even after committing the crime. He testified that he had pulled her dead body out to sea and pushed it into it, which is why nobody was ever located after the years of thorough searches. For nearly 2 decades, he allowed her family to suffer in limbo without resolution while making repeated false confessions, changing his story multiple times, and attempting to profit on their desperation by selling false news of her whereabouts. The details of his final confession had aligned with suspicions of authorities for decades. Unlike previous attempts at gaining publicity, the report had support from tangible facts that matched earlier investigations. While it could not bring Natalee back, it had finally provided her family with the tragic answers they had been waiting almost 20 years to hear. Whether the remains of Natalee Holloway would ever be found has been a haunting question for her family, investigators, and the public for almost 2 decades. Even with relentless efforts, many searches, and worldwide scrutiny of the case, her remains were not found. Recent revelations, including Vandersloot's much-awaited confession, finally answered questions regarding her destiny, though the prospect of the recovery of her body was still brutally uncertain. According to his 2023 confession, Natalee was killed and buried in the ocean in a matter of hours after she disappeared. He reported striking her once in the head with a cinder block along the beach before he dragged her into the sea. If this is indeed what occurred, and authorities believed it most likely did, it presented severe challenges to recovering her body. The size and power of the sea created insurmountable obstacles. Tides, currents, and marine activity covering nearly 20 years would have made preservation and recovery impossible. Practically speaking, despite the discovery of truth, nature had likely covered up the last physical traces of her. Years passed, and numerous searches were carried out in various locations like ponds, sand dunes, and rubbish tips, all based on tips, leads, or confessions, most of them false or ridiculous. Cadaver dogs were deployed, ponds were drained, and satellite photographs were taken to search for disturbed earth. The FBI even searched hair samples and duct tape, but all in vain. There remains a small possibility that her remains might be discovered by a diver, lying on the beach or in future excavation work. But most experts agree that after all these years, recovery is unlikely. The sea, if indeed where she was disposed, is not exactly a game of do-overs when it comes to remains recovery. And just like a grave or a landfill, it doesn't preserve, but scatters. This horrific reality is one many families of ocean disappearances must endure. And yet, for Natalee's family, this final admission may be the closest to closure they are ever likely to have. To have an idea of what happened to her, even if they can't bring her home, is some measure of closure. While perhaps never physically regained by her body, the truth long concealed beneath lies has come to light. Sometimes, when physical evidence is eliminated, the truth is the only kind of justice that remains. Natalee did not die under suspicious circumstances. There was no high-tech cover-up by a number of people, and no hope remained that she had managed to escape. Her life was stolen in a brutal act by a person whom she had just met, and then she lived for years without remorsefully concealing the truth. Even the case was investigated at length and horribly. But even as the truth began to surface, another question loomed. Why did it take so long to get here? And did the investigation itself, from the island's response to the family's actions, help uncover the truth or bury it deeper? Criticisms of investigation. The Twitty family and their supporters vociferously denounced what they perceived as glacial progress in the investigation by the Aruban authorities. The Twitty family themselves, however, were criticized for their own conduct on the island. They were accused of stifling potentially damning information regarding Natalee Holloway by silencing her classmates when questioned about the case and using media to disseminate their version of events, a charge that the Twitties vociferously denied. Beth Twitty openly made some claims in the media interviews, and the book that Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were privy to something about Natalee's disappearance beyond what they had previously acknowledged. In addition, she also said that at least one of them had molested her daughter. After the Kalpoe brothers were released from detention on July 5, 2005, Twitty made a statement that was controversial to be sure. It read, "Two suspects have been released yesterday who were involved in a violent crime against my daughter," and then proceeded to call them criminals. This prompted about 200 Arubans to go to the courthouse of Oranjestad that evening with placards saying, "Innocent until proven guilty," and "Respect our Dutch laws or leave." In response to Twitty's allegations, Satish Kalpoe's lawyer threatened litigation and referred to the allegations Twitty made about the Kalpoe brothers as prejudicial, inflammatory, libelous, and downright absurd. On July 8th, Twitty made a public apology for having made her comments in despair and frustration, while sending an apology to the Aruban people and government for offending them. In 2007, Beth Twitty published Loving Natalee, A Mother's Testament of Hope and Faith. In a fall appearance on Nancy Grace, she reiterated her belief that it was van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers who committed the crime. She insisted that more would need to be done to achieve justice, claiming, "If we stop trying, there's absolutely no chance anything will happen." Following a Dutch TV show broadcast by Peter R. de Vries with evidence on a compromising video of van der Sloot, Twitty maintained that the videos depict what transpired in Natalee's case of disappearance. In an interview with the New York Post, she said her daughter might be alive today if Vandersloot had called for assistance. She blamed him for concealing the body of Natalee, potentially with Natalee still conscious in the Caribbean Sea. In addition, Twitty also alleged that Joran had phoned his father, Paulus Vandersloot, who was involved in planning a cover-up. The Holloway family also contended that Vandersloot had been accorded preferential treatment by the Aruban justice system. After a court ruling excluded Vandersloot's rearrest, Twitty stated, "His life is a living hell," and later added, "I would accept a Midnight Express prison anywhere for Joran." In response to the disappearance of her daughter, Twitty founded the International Safe Travels Foundation, a not-for-profit entity that aims to educate the public on safer travel abroad. In May of 2010, she issued a statement that she was to open up the Natalee Holloway Resource Center within the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, D.C. The center, which officially opened on June 8th, was established with the goal of assisting families of missing persons. The Holloways initially spoke against a boycott of travel to Aruba, but turned around by September 2005. Beth Twitty also publicly urged Americans to avoid traveling to Aruba and other Dutch islands out of concern for tourist safety. Alabama Governor Bob Riley and the Holloways both demanded a boycott at a November 8th press conference. Riley also took his appeal to the other U.S. governors, who were friendly, obtaining approval from those who represented Arkansas and Georgia. The Philadelphia City Council also approved a resolution urging Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell to join the boycott, but he declined, and no federal sanction was forthcoming. Some in Alabama's congressional delegation came out in support of the boycott, including both senators and Representative Spencer Bachus. Senator Richard Shelby addressed the American Society of Travel Agents, speaking out of concern for the safety of U.S. citizens in Aruba, stating, "We cannot trust that we will be protected while in Aruba." Calling for a response, Aruban Prime Minister Nelson Oduber defended the island's detectives and criticized the boycott as preposterous and irresponsible, stating, "We are not guerrillas. We are not terrorists. We don't threaten the United States, nor Alabama." The business and tourist communities and the government of Aruba formed the Aruba Strategic Communications Task Force in an effort to counter negative portrayals of the island. The delegation, which consisted of members of the Aruba Hotel and Tourism Association and the Aruba Tourism Authority, issued statements and appeared in the media to refute the boycott and defend the way the island was handling the case. Yes, the media had a very aggressive role in spinning the stories, and to be clear, the press did not accurately reflect Natalee's story from the start. But as Aruba fought to defend its reputation, the media storm only grew stronger, turning a local tragedy into a global spectacle. How did the press shape this story? And at what cost to the truth? Media coverage. Natalee Holloway's disappearance sent a media frenzy that would forever change the face of modern-day news reporting. Within hours of the disappearance of the Alabama teenager on a graduation excursion in Aruba, her face appeared on television sets throughout the United States. The case had all the elements of media intrigue. A young, attractive American tourist who had disappeared in a tropical paradise. Cable news channels, especially in the United States, provided blanket coverage of the developing story, effectively changing Natalee's local missing persons case into a story that was shared globally. Beth Twitty, Natalee's mother, became a dominant presence in the media, appearing on nationally recognized shows such as Nancy Grace, Larry King Live, and The Today Show. Her relentless efforts to find her daughter resonated with the public, and cable television news networks, especially Fox News and CNN, made the Holloway saga daytime fodder. The networks aired hundreds of segments on potential suspects, motives, and theories, most of which had no basis in fact. Primary suspect Joran van der Sloot's name became household fodder due to the intense media scrutiny. Coverage occasionally crossed into tabloid territory, casting him as the villain in what appeared to be a made-for-television drama. While the intense media pressure helped to keep the investigation on the front burner, it also generated controversy. Critics commented on the disparate coverage of Holloway's case compared to other missing persons cases, particularly those of individuals of color. The disparity fueled additional discussion about missing white woman syndrome, a phenomenon in which the media covers young, white, middle, or upper-class female victims to a great extent, while others are covered little, if at all. Relationships between Aruban authorities and the media continued to be complicated. Though welcoming the attention initially as perhaps a way of aiding in the resolution of the case, frustration developed as time passed. Warranted and unjust criticism was piled on Aruban law enforcement during live broadcasts, and islanders felt that their island was being unjustly represented. Negative publicity resulted in declining tourist rates and media suggestions of corruption or incompetence on the part of the Aruban Police Department created a rift between U.S. media and Aruban officials. As time passed, the media began to shift their coverage from Natalee's disappearance itself to the alleged shortcomings of the investigation. Every slight break in the case was heralded as a breaking news headline, and every van der Sloot statement, confession, recantation, or shock revelation was page 1 news. The media's grip on the story was unrelenting, and it equaled the public's ongoing fascination. The missing persons case had by this time evolved into an all-out media obsession. Years later, the case continued to attract attention whenever there were new developments, like van der Sloot's killing arrest in Peru and his extradition to the U.S. Documentaries, true crime programs, and dramatized television specials kept Natalee's case in the public consciousness long after daily news coverage faded away. Shows such as Dateline NBC, 2020, and streaming services returned to the case again and again, attempting to reconstruct what had happened to her. Finally, the case of Natalee Holloway represented a watershed moment in media coverage of cases of missing persons. The case showed the power of public vigilance, but also key flaws in the sensational tone and hypocritical biases in mass media reviewing and decision-making. The active media definitely helped to keep the investigation in the headlines and pressure authorities to pursue the case, but it also raised ugly and irresponsible aspects of news coverage, bias, overexposure, and increasingly blurred lines between journalism and entertainment. We have now come to the end of today's video. If you find this video interesting, make sure to share your thoughts on the video in the comment section below. See you in the next video.